I'm about to show you simple yet insanely powerful strategies to master the digital SAT reading section. Once you learn how to do this in these 3 easy steps, it's gonna skyrocket your accuracy, boost your confidence, and finally get you the score that you need. And this is the exact same strategy that has helped hundreds of students crush the SAT. So let's jump right into it. For you to get a high SAT score, you definitely need to improve your reading score. And improving your reading score leads to so many opportunities, like higher total SAT score equals better college options. A strong SAT reading score can really boost your overall SAT performance, and that will make you a stronger applicant than so many students. And you can also get bigger scholarship opportunities. And you can also improve your reading skills, and you can understand faster, and you can be way more effective when you're reading and when you're processing complex information. Next up, you can also improve your critical thinking and comprehension by improving your reading score. So, and you have a question, but how do you actually improve your SAT reading score? And there are mainly 2 ways of improving it. So the first way is by mastering implicit meaning and author's purpose. And this is really powerful skill that you need to have in order to crush the SAT reading section. And the next step, you need the right strategies. And in this video, we will cover both of these, and I've prepared SAT questions that I've created, and I will show you so many strategies that you will need, and I will also tell you how to master implicit meaning and how to identify the purpose of the author. But firstly, let me tell you, your SAT reading journey looks like this. You watch your favorite SAT tutor's guaranteed 1620 plus SAT score masterclass video. You spend 3 hours trying to use a vague skimming and scanning strategy that they gave you to answer a single passage. And you check your answers with the College Board explanations, but half of them make no sense. You take a much deserved break to watch some random YouTube videos or maybe videos on Instagram. And a week later, you see a Reddit post of a student flexing the 1580 SAT score and the acceptance to Harvard. And you suddenly remember your SAT reading practice. So you say, this is time to lock in, right? And you review your old mistakes and answers, and you actually recognize some of those questions. And you're about to be a reading genius. You start telling your friends, family, that this is the time you will finally break through SAT reading. You're already a master of the SAT, right? All you need now is just practice a little more. And you look up an advanced SAT reading strategy video from your favorite tutor. And you start using those overhyped tricks to skyrocket your score. And you practice for maybe a day. Absolute crickets. Your score barely moves. You kinda give up, and then you stumble across another tutor's video promising secret SAT reading hack no one talks about. You try, and still struggling. You pretty much give up on SAT reading. It's just not fair. The test takers should be rewarding your random guessing strategies. They should be handing out free 700 plus scores in the SAT English section, right? That was a joke. So the real problem is that you haven't mastered implicit meaning and the purpose of the author. And the second real problem is that you're not using the right strategies for the SAT. So firstly, let's master implicit meaning and author's purpose. So firstly, in order to master it, you need to understand tone and attitudes, which is why the author feels a certain way. Secondly, you need to understand underlying assumptions. These are hidden messages in the text. Next up, we will cover contrast and shift words. It's usually where the argument changes its direction. Now let's first start off with tone and attitude. why the other feels a certain way. So firstly, the first really powerful strategy that if you start implementing this, you will see so much growth, which is finding the adjectives and adverbs. If the author says, this discovery was remarkable and groundbreaking, their tone is enthusiastic. And if they say, this theory is questionable and unconvincing, the tone is skeptical. It may seem a little too easy, but we will move on even to so advanced and really powerful strategies as well. Next up, the second thing that you have to look at is looking at the verbs. Ask yourself, if the author challenges an idea, that means they're skeptical. And if they praise something, they're supportive. Next up, you need to analyze the opening and closing lines. Usually, I'm not saying all the time, but usually the introduction often hints at tone, and the conclusion reinforces it. There's also something final to know about tone and attitude that so many students get wrong, which is tone questions have subtle traps. A lot of students think that optimistic and hopeful are the same things, right? When you think about it, it kind of seems they're the same thing, but actually they are completely different stuff. Optimistic is confident, and hopeful suggests uncertainty. And that's an important thing you need to understand. Now let's move on to the second part, which is underlying assumptions, which are hidden messages in the passage. Ask yourself, what must be true for this argument to work? If an author argues that banning cars will reduce pollution, there is the hidden assumption there, which is cars are a major cause of pollution. Also, look for gaps in logic. Usually in the text, if the author says more money in education leads to smarter students, the assumption is that funding is the main factor affecting intelligence, and that it's kind of looking for that logic in the text. Next up, identify cause and effect claims. If an author argues that watching TV causes laziness, that means that they seem TV is the main reason for laziness. Next up, contrast and shift words, and that's where the argument changes its direction. So firstly, the most easy and basic way of doing it is by spotting but and however. So that's the easiest part of it. And these words signal an important shift in the argument, and it usually kind of leads to the main idea. Next up, you can look for cause and effect shifts. And those can be as a result, thus, therefore, and those words, and those phrases or linking words indicate conclusions from those previous arguments in the passage. Sometimes a shift is subtle or delayed. If the contrast isn't immediately after, however, you need to read one more sentence for full clarity. Sometimes it's not usually going to be as clearly shown like this. Now let's look at some SAT reading questions in order to apply the right strategies, and I will also show those strategies after analyzing these questions. So the first one, we have two texts. And now let's read the question. Based on the text, how will the author of text 1 would most likely respond to the claim about benefits of that research in text 2? Okay, that is interesting. So now let's read both of the texts. The classification of ancient written scripts has long been debated. So there was a debate. While some scholars argue that grouping them into broad linguistic families is usable, others claim that such classifications can be overly simplistic and fail to account for the complexities of the language evolution. As linguists argue in their study, the relationships between scripts may be better understood through their functional use rather than linguistic lineage. So, text 1 argues that classifying those ancient scripts by linguistic family can be misleading, and that functional use is a better way to analyze them. So if we now know the meaning of text 1, now let's move on to text 2. The Indus script found in the ruins of ancient Indus Valley civilization remains undeciphered. Some researchers believe that computational analysis could reveal patterns in the script that suggest it represents a true language rather than a set of symbolic or religious marks. By applying the statistical methods similar to those used in deciphering the main scripts, researcher and his team aim to categorize recurrent patterns, potentially leading to the breakthroughs in script classification. So text 2 kind of describes how uh, those computational analysis might help to classify. It also kind of understand the in this script as well, and it says there are patterns, so in short, text 2 says such classifications are useful. Whereas in text 1, it says that classifications based on linguistic family is misleading and functional use is a better way. That's what text wants. Now let's kind of try to predict. I believe that text 2, the author would say or would argue that function is a more effective way to study those scripts. Now let's look at answer choices. Choice A, by suggesting that future research may provide substantial advancements in the field of computational script analysis. Well, text 1 questions classification itself rather than arguing for better research methods, so that's why A is wrong. Choice B, by asserting that classifying ancient scripts based on linguistic lineage may not be the most effective approach. I believe this is the right answer because text 1's argument directly states that classification by line age is too simplistic. So I guess B is the right answer. But still, let's have a look at other choices. C, by arguing that some scripts are more easily deciphered using computational methods than others. Well, text 1 doesn't even discuss differences in how scripts are deciphered. That's why choice C is wrong. Choice D, by emphasizing that written symbols do not always represent full linguistic systems. Well, this may be a valid linguistic idea, but text 1 does not focus on whether those symbols are a part of a full language. That's why choice D is also wrong. Now, here are 3 strategies that are so powerful, and make sure to use those strategies in so many SAT questions. So the first strategy here is applying the principle of scientific skepticism. And you may be thinking, what does that even mean? Well, SAT questions often test your critical thinking skills as well. So one passage may challenge the assumptions of another passage. If one text questions classification methods, the correct answer will likely emphasize why classification is flawed rather than suggesting improvements. Next up, use any logical inference chains. For example, if text 1 argues against classification in general and text 2 supports classification with a new methods, then that means that text 1's author wouldn't suddenly approve of a new method. They would likely still disagree. And then next up, you have the third strategy, which is identifying the competing hypotheses trap. Usually, wrong answer choices often introduce competing but sometimes unrelated hypotheses like ease of deciphering in this case. And in order to avoid being trapped, you have to ask yourself, does this choice match the main argument, or is it a related but wrong answer choice? Now let's move on to the next SAT question. And it is text completion question type. Now let's try and answer this question. So the first thing, we need the question, which choice most logically complete the text? Okay. So now let's read the text. Certain similarities in listeners, the brain wave patterns corresponded to the structural similarities between genres, suggesting a neurological basis for musical perception. This was observed for both jazz and electronic music, but was especially pronounced in listeners' responses to classical compositions, which can be seen in the heightened activation of the prefrontal cortex, an area linked to complex auditory processing. A different study found that those classical music evokes similar neural responses, suggesting that's blank. So we need to logically complete the text. Firstly, let's talk about the passage. The passage told that musical genres with structural similarities evoke similar neural responses, and classical music, especially here, as you can see, classical music triggers similar brain activities. That's what it means. Now let's move on to selecting answer choices. Choice A, that similarities with respect to that response could result from a shaped aspect of the musical structure. I believe this is the right answer because this directly connects to the finding of that idea that the similarity in neural activity is because of structural commonalities. As you can see here, it's because of structural similarities or commonalities, and choice A directly supports that. Choice B, individual listeners of baroque music likely exhibit higher prefrontal cortex activation than listeners of romantic music. Well, the passage doesn't compare the strengths of the response between the two genres, so that's why B is the wrong answer choice. Choice C, baroque and romantic music elicit a stronger neurological response than most other music genres. Well, the passage doesn't even claim that how strong the response is compared to all other genres. That's why she's wrong. Choice D, the two genres will likely become less structurally similar over time. Well, this passage is just about current neurological responses. It doesn't even predict future changes in musical genres, so that's why D is also wrong. So as you can see, there are two strategies that are really important, which are using the cause and effect contingency rule. And this strategy is so powerful, and you can actually use it in almost every SAT reading question. And for example, the passage might set up a cause. In this case, it's similar structure. And then there could be an effect, which is similar neural responses. And the correct answer should reinforce this cause and effect link, and it should not introduce a new or unrelated idea. Next up, the next strategy is identifying scientific assumptions. Well, the passage in this case assumes that structural similarities in music lead to neural similarities, and the best answer should directly support this assumption rather than challenging it. So that's also an important strategy that we need to know. Now that you know the right strategies and you know how to identify the purpose of the author and you've mastered the implicit meaning, if you still make mistakes that are ruining your score, well, all of these statements are useless. So make sure to check out this video where I shared top 5 biggest mistakes that are hurting your score.